Hello, everyone. So, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to just take this first few minutes, probably it'll only be a minute as people start trickling in, to just go over some of the introduction basics. So, as you just heard, I will be recording this webinar and it will be posted on the Wisconsin Land and Water website at some point in the near future. But I'll also be sending out a link to everybody who registered when it's available, as well as the link to the evaluation. So for today's presentation, Roberta Walls with DNR will be presenting on Reclamation Enforcement Toolbox. We're going to be taking questions throughout the presentation in the chat line, which is on that bottom toolbar. And you can submit a question at any time, and we'll get them answered as we can. And there's a special Q&A feature at the end that will be have the time to discuss them more. And so without any further ado, Roberta, please take it away.
All right, thank you, Isabel. Welcome, everyone. Today's presentation on the Reclamation Enforcement Toolbox is kind of a follow-up from last month where we talked about what types of reclamation violations you might encounter while regulating your non-metallic mine sites. So anytime I refer to a regulatory authority, I am referring to those county and local municipalities that administer a reclamation ordinance. I will help you navigate some of your more challenging situations, and I will also come and provide that oversight to ensure that you are administering the program in accordance with NR 135 and State Statute 295. So I thought today we would go through and identify those tools that are available to all regulatory authorities with regards to non-metallic mine reclamation. So we're slated to go for about an hour and a half today. How long we make it, I'm going to call on you guys to help fill in towards the end in sharing some of your experiences and or asking some specific questions. We'll take a look at your enforcement tools as given to you under the state statute, and then talk a little bit about stepped enforcement. I introduced that last month. We're going to expound on that a little bit more. And then we're going to go back and revisit some of those situational applications that we entertained last month, and I will expand on some of the ones that maybe we didn't have groups working through to kind of maybe round out those tools. And then I will also have my own experiences that I will share with you, and then hopefully maybe some resources you can draw on. And so without further ado, let's jump in. So statutory authorities. We're going to go through and take a look at these individually, but you do have the regulatory authorities have the right to inspect non-metallic mines. You are able to issue orders to have folks comply or cease violating. You also have the ability to order a suspension or revocation of a permit. You also have the ability to order cease activity, also known as a stop work order. In many instances, that is a greater authority than perhaps maybe what the DNR can do, as our stop work authorities have to go with the referral process and has to meet certain state requirements for that. But your authority under the statute is a bit more broad. We'll talk a little bit about what referral means. It's a general loose term, but basically that is involving the court systems. And then you also have penalty or citation authority. So Isabel, I'd like to get an idea of which enforcement tools our RAs have used. Can you pull up our first poll question? Give us an idea of what you may have used so far when it comes to enforcement on non-metallic mine sites. If I don't have something up on the list, please enter that option into the chat box. I'll give folks a minute or so to enter your poll answer. All right, last minute entries, and we can end the poll. And I'm sorry if I cut anyone off, but looks like the vast majority of folks have utilized some type of notice of noncompliance and or violation. And no one has really weighed in on citation or suspension or revocation. We have a couple of others. Isabel, can you indicate what folks may have shared within the chat box?
Yes. One person shared that while the poll, I think it was for only choosing one answer, some have used all.
Okay.
And then another person said that they typically start with conversation about stop work and usually get the right response right after.
Very good. Okay, so one or more or a combination, and that is a really good place to be because we're going to talk a little bit about how your enforcement authority can be applied, and some of that will also include a combination. So with that, continue on. All right, so rights to inspect. If you have any operators that don't feel as though that you have the ability to get out there and do inspections, you can throw your authority under state statute 295-17 out. It's in the code as well, but you should also refer to your ordinance because that's where your authority is primarily established. But the statute does give you that authority and allows you to get out on the site to inspect those sites for compliance with your ordinance and the reclamation code. So what does it have to say about right to inspect? Well, it does have to be a credentialed person within the county or local municipality, and pretty much that credential can be like a county issued ID badge. My access into my building here is my ID badge, and that is my state credentials. So a credentialed person may enter at any time. It is for the purpose of assessing compliance with the reclamation requirements. It also goes on to say that no person can obstruct, refuse, hamper, or interfere with an inspection. And that can take a lot of different forms. I have had some instances where operators insist that MSHA credentials were required, and that is not necessarily the case. Safety is, of course, in my book, number one priority when entering a non-metallic mine site. There was a time in our nation's history in which the number one dangerous occupation was being a miner. And that has changed over the years with implementation of the Mine Safety and Health Administration. But we are seeing an uptick in mine-related injuries and fatalities. So going in with your best foot forward with safety is concerned, have that PPE, hard hat, safety vest, steel toe shoes. In some instances, you may need additional equipment, goggles, hearing protection, and things of that like, but bring your own PPE. Ensure that you have the proper safety, which at a mine site, it is the operator's requirement that they have a site-specific safety plan. And that at a minimum should be the safety training that you receive when going out and doing an inspection. And so if an operator refuses to provide you their site-specific safety training, that could be construed as an interference, a refusal, or some type of obstruction to getting a site inspection done. And so then you might need to call in reinforcements if you need to get out onto that site and do an inspection. When you're done with your inspection, you are required to provide some type of inspection report back to the operator. And that is your authority for inspection under the statute. So once you've gotten in there and you've taken a look at it, and if you found violations or you believe the site to be non-compliant, State Statute 295-19 under subchapter 1A gives you the authority to order an operator to comply with the reclamation requirements or to stop violating. What's the difference? Well, one is in ordering an operator to comply assumes that they have all of their permits in place, the reclamation plans in place, and that they are just simply not meeting the standards or following the plan, so they are being ordered to comply. Cease violating is something that can be added in or part of the order to comply if you're dealing with an unpermitted site or an operator who has grossly misappropriated the site and created conditions that cannot cause the operator to follow their reclamation plan. So that pertains to your ordinance, a reclamation permit, the permit conditions, and the approved plans. So it's a very general and broad order that you can place. And we'll talk a little bit about how that order applies when doing enforcement. Under the next subsection in the statute, 1B, you are also authorized to issue an order that suspends or revokes a permit. Now, that is subject to the grounds for that revocation and suspension, and those are found in the code. You should also have references to this in your ordinance as well. And the three main ones that follow an order or suspension of suspension or revocation is failing to follow that reclamation plan, failing to submit or maintain financial assurance, and then failing to follow the approved plan. So again, it's like we have something similar, but when do you apply it? Moving on, there's another authority that you have, also under that first section 1A, that allows you to order an operator to cease activities. So coupled with an order to comply or cease violating is your authority to issue that stop work order. And again, it applies under your ordinance. It is there and in place until approvals are made. And it is also there until they meet their permit conditions and their reclamation plan. So that stop work order has no time frame associated with it. It is until they return to compliance. Under the next section, under State Statute 295-19-1D, you have the ability to refer a matter to a higher authority. So like DNR, most counties are part of the executive branch of government. You are executing the regulations and evaluating compliance. Your authority under that may be limited when you don't have cooperation from the operator or when you have more egregious situations. And so this portion of the law allows you to hand that over to the court systems for enforcement. And that court system can involve your district attorney, your corporation counsel, municipal attorney, or the attorney general. So You can get DNR involved if needed. Generally, when you have a referral situation, that something of a more egregious nature is involved, and therefore there may be multiple agencies involved. And so being able to move that out of the local courts and into the higher courts is also afforded as part of this referral process. The next section under 295-19(3) is where you will find your citation authority. You can place a penalty on a violating facility. There's a minimum and maximum dollar amount for each violation that you identify under your ordinance. That dollar amount can be applied on a daily basis for each day that that violation occurs. And it applies not only to your permitted facilities, but anybody who is seen to be violating your ordinance that has not yet obtained a permit. All right. I have another poll question, and these are our only 2 poll questions. We're going to get you more involved down the road here, but I'd like to know if there's an enforcement tool that you've not used to this date. We'll talk a little bit about when to pull those enforcement tools out. And then if you have a combination or more than one type of tool that you haven't used, feel free to share that as well. Take a moment and let us know if there's a tool that you're not familiar with or just simply haven't needed to use it. Okay, any last selections to be made? And we'll have the poll ended and share our results. Here we go. So it's pretty even around. Suspension, revocation, and referrals are those are definitely what we would consider to be those higher level of enforcement processes. Citations may or may not be effective. We'll talk a little bit about that. And we've had some folks out there that have, if this is interpreted right, I said if you've not ever not used a tool before, like you've used all of them, we've had some folks out there that have explored all the processes. And do we have anything in the chat box from folks?
Yeah, we've had a few questions.
Okay.
So the first one is, are there any rules or general practices for how many inspections we have a right to per year? Is there a limit?
Nope. As a matter of fact, you are able to set your inspection frequency at the county and local municipality discretion. We leave it up to you to make that decision. You may have sites that are more active or more prone to environmental problems, or operators that are problematic. So you can set a precedent over how often each and every site is going to be seen annually or how frequently, but you also can make that discretion when a site needs to be seen more frequently. So there is no limitation on the number of inspections you can go and do.
Okay, and then we have one other question. So what authority do we have to inspect sites that are not yet permitted but may need a non-metallic mining reclamation permit?
Ah, that's great. So I'm going to back up a little bit to where we have that inspection authority slide. Oops. Here we go. So the purpose for inspection is compliance with reclamation requirements, right? So regardless of whether they're under a permit or not, if you suspect a site to be a non-metallic mine site, you need to be able to ascertain whether or not it is compliant with those requirements. And so that authority right there allows you to go and review a site. Maybe it's a construction site, but you don't know that, or you won't know that until you get on site, take a look at it, measure the size. Maybe it's a 9/10 of an acre and falls under the exemptions, right? It's still a mine, but you need to go and see if it requires that permit or if it falls under an exemption. So that authority is in place for you for the purpose of ascertaining compliance with the reclamation requirements. Okay, any other questions?
Nothing else is in the chat right now.
Okay. All right, so let's do some considerations here. Let me get my arrow back over here. All right, so some considerations. Do know that when you embark on enforcement, and by enforcement, I'm not really talking at this point about those one-on-one conversations that you're having with operators. This generally begins when you start doing orders, be a general order to comply or a stop work order. Even that referral process to the court systems, that enforcement decision can be subject to review. So an operator can basically counter challenge your authority about that violation. They can't really challenge your authority per se directly to issue an order, but they can say, I think you're wrong about that violation. And so at that point, a contested case hearing could be held if the operator so chooses to file. So here's where it's going to be very important for you to document very clearly and describe what that violation is and point it back to your ordinance. And then demonstrate your efforts to regain that compliance that led up to that order. So this is where maybe now we can begin to get the need for a stepped enforcement process. I don't know why I have authority to issue the order, because it's not the actual ability for you to issue the order, but rather the specific code or specific reference that you're making. So, you know, if you're saying that they've failed to modify a reclamation plan, you need to be able to show what components of the reclamation plan needs to be modified. So that's pretty much what I intended with that last item. Another consideration will involve permit suspension. So for those of you who have used permit suspension, maybe these are going to be somewhat familiar to you. Those of you who are not have not used permit suspension, then consider some of these items. So permit suspension is intended to be a temporary situation. The code allows you up to 30 days to put a permit into suspension. It's often used in conjunction with the cease operations or stop work order. What it does do is it forces the operator to stop mining. Now, a stop work order typically would do that, the same thing, but by suspending the permit, you're sending doubly the message that not only do I not want you to do excavation and processing, I also don't want you to haul material out of here, because part of your permit authorization includes the sale of that material off the site. So you would use that in a situation where you really need that operator to focus in on getting back into compliance, because the one thing that is allowed under suspension is the work that is needed to be done in order to regain compliance with reclamation. After 30 days has elapsed, then the RA, the regulatory authority, needs to you're kind of at a decision point. Either you need to be able to say after 30 days that this operator has returned back to compliance again, or you're going to move to the next degree or next level of enforcement, which may be another extension on suspension. I'd offer some caution in doing repeated suspensions, because if you are extending, beyond 6 months under a permit suspension, there may be something a little bit more at play that suggests that you might need to move to revocation in claiming that bond. So those are some considerations when it comes to permit suspensions. Now, considerations under revocation. Okay, so you've got a non-compliant operator, you've been pushing back. There's some extenuating circumstances associated with them being able to meet his reclamation requirements. And you're looking at moving to permit revocation. Some of the things that you will need to consider with revocation is that it will ultimately precipitate final reclamation of that site. As soon as you pull that permit, you are also going to be claiming that bond. Once the permit is revoked, then that operator is to forfeit their financial assurance. When you are opting to revocate and claim that bond, that forfeiture is obtained by the regulatory authority according to the financial institute process. So they may want to see proof that the permit has been revoked, proof that that operator is not meeting their obligations under that financial assurance. So having that inspection report, having that order, and any documentation that you have that has led up to your decision to revoke a permit may be something that the bank will need to have a copy of in order to process your claim. Then any financial assurance that you obtain under that process is used to reclaim that site. And that can take many different shapes and forms, depending on the condition of the site and the amount of financial assurance you have in place. One other thing to note is if you do decide to go to revocation and forfeiture, that operator will be barred from mining in the state of Wisconsin for a period of up to 10 years. This has happened. And we're not talking about a company not being allowed to mine, but any of its officials that organized and ran that company. So if you have, two guys excavating go bankrupt, and guy number one decides to cut loose and have nothing to do with two guys anymore, starts his own company up, that revocation is going to follow him. And so do take that into consideration that revocation is a serious business. The industry at the time that the code and the statute was being developed supported this notion to help keep into check those folks who are abusing the authority and the right to mine in the state of Wisconsin. So forfeiture and revocation will bar somebody from being able to mine for a pretty long time. Okay, these are your tools. So now what do you do, right? You've got some situations on hand, and you need to get compliance with some of your sites out there. So we're going to jump in and talk a little bit about the stepped enforcement process. And this is using those tools. All right, so obviously we have folks who have gone down the road and utilized the notification process. You have informed folks of non-compliant situations, violations of your ordinances. Some of you have expressed the permit suspension revocation as a driving tool to get compliance back. Not very many of you have utilized the referral and prosecution step. I will have a story for you on that. And we also have had folks that have used the citation stop work order. So when do you pull those out? Well, last month, I kind of showed you the stair-step model in which you start out at the base, working through your informal contacts, identifying what needs to be corrected, and giving them the chance under good graces to make those corrections. Notice of noncompliance is kind of that next level step up, in which maybe the verbal or the informal process didn't result in compliance. And then it kind of escalates from there. That request for secondary enforcement, that's when maybe now you're asking your law enforcement staff to issue a citation, or maybe you're now talking with your corp counsel about getting a stop work order in place. That's where now we begin to cross from that lower level up into the more higher level types of enforcement, including your notices of violations. We'll talk a little bit about enforcement conferences and what they can be useful for. Administrative or consent order, that's pretty much when you're now going to the court system and you are getting that referral process, and maybe some higher level penalties. Maybe you've got a bonding for lower level penalties and citations that you can issue, but as they begin to build and accumulate, maybe now we're talking with the court systems about, what would be the best restitution or injunction for this individual. And so those conversations all take place with attorneys, with the operators, both not only for the county and the local municipality, but also those that are representing possibly the operator as well. So what does that look like? Well, so one of the things that you need to consider in the stepped enforcement process is the degree of cooperation that you're getting from your operator. Are they responsive to you? Can you get a hold of them? Are they feeding you a line? How are they responding or reacting to your requests to make corrections? You also might want to consider whether or not an operator came forward and say, hey, we had a situation out here. We're just letting you know, we're making corrections, but we want to give you the opportunity to come out here and have a look. Okay. There are operators out there that will be open and honest and upfront with you on that, versus maybe a complaint that comes in. We hear a lot of the neighbors may reach out to you and be concerned. Not always does a complaint lead to a violation, but sometimes they do. Awareness, is the operator even aware that a violation has or has occurred? So sometimes, like in maybe a more rural location where an operator is there maybe a couple of times a year, maybe they're not aware that maybe somebody came in with a truckload of something and dumped it. Okay, so giving them the opportunity to say, hey, I found a bunch of stuff in your pit that need to get cleared out of there. Or is there more evidence that there is a large accumulation of material occurring, suggesting that maybe the operator themselves is bringing something in that they shouldn't be bringing in? Also, are they avoiding you? Are they being responsive? And to what degree? That's going to tell you where you're going to start out on your rung, right? Are you going to start out with that simple conversation and giving them the opportunity to correct? Or are you going to send that letter right away? Also, you're going to know your operator well. Has they been problematic in the past for you or not? So those are the things that you can consider about where to start on your enforcement rung. You can also consider degree of violation and impact. If an operator has non-metallic mine permits for other sites and they start up without getting a reclamation permit, they probably have had prior knowledge that they got to get a permit, right? So taking into evaluation whether or not this operator has demonstrated prior knowledge of having to meet requirements can also impact the degree or level of where you start out in your stepped enforcement process. Also consider the level of skill and training that the operator has at being able to meet the requirements. My story that I will share with you in a little bit had operators that were very amenable, communicative, but they just simply lacked the skill and training needed in order to carry out those objectives. So a lot of that's going to come into play with regards to where you start out with your step enforcement process. All right, before we jump into the art of letter writing, do we have any questions or comments in the chat?
Yes, we've had two questions. The first one is, where is the hearing heard? And I think that was in reference to one of the first slides after the second poll.
Okay. Yes, so this is going to be held at your local level. So if it's at a county level, it will be held at the county court systems. If the municipality is the regulatory authority, be held within that municipal court type system. So you always want to hold your enforcement processes either at your county or local municipal location. And that's also too if you decide to opt for hosting an enforcement conference of some type as well. Corporate counsel office, or you know, if you're going through the court system, your local judicial branch there, city hall, whichever. Okay.
Okay, and the second question is, how would regulatory authority know if someone is barred from mining in Wisconsin because of a revoked permit? What if the person comes to a different county to mine? How do we know they can't?
That's a very good question, and it is a challenge. You can seek the Wisconsin corporate records search to see where they're registered in. You can talk with your neighboring counties and say, hey, I've got a new operator that I've never worked with before. Have you had any problems with them? You know, I think having that information sharing, calling your neighbor counterparts, checking the corporate records, and also don't forget to check Wisconsin. We call it CCAP, the Circuit Court Access. You can do a search for an operator on the Wisconsin Circuit Court Access, because these types of revocations and enforcement proceedings that go through the courts will be logged as a civil case. And so you can learn a lot about an operator by looking them up through those means. There unfortunately is no registry that says an operator has been barred. So you kind of have to do a bit of a search and deduction type method. All right. Barring any more questions, let's talk a little bit about what it means, what an order would look like. Okay, so you've been out to the field, you've seen some non-compliances, you maybe have an operator that is operating a non-metallic mine without permits, and it's time to issue an order to comply. And so your ordinance section will give you those specific violation sections that you need to cite in your order. Okay, so they're operating without a permit. You need to tell them in the order, we believe you are in violation of ordinance section requiring an operator to obtain permit prior to beginning mining. Okay, So you're going to look for each of those ordinance sections with which they need to comply with, and you're going to list that. You're also going to provide an expectation for returning to compliance. Depending on the severity of the situation, you may want to give them a very short window, maybe a certain action for submitting an application in a week's time, maybe if it's needing to get a modification of a reclamation plan, maybe 2 weeks or a month. Use your best judgment. That is a discretion level for you to determine that time frame that you're looking for them to become back into compliance. Then you're also going to need to identify any consequences for not complying. Maybe if you're starting out at just that simple notification that these are the sections that we believe you are in violation of, and here is the time frame to get an application in. If you don't provide it by that date, then we, the county, local municipality, will be forced to have to move to a stop work order or issue a penalty, or, and you can list every single one of them out there so that they're aware that you mean business when you want them to comply. So I got permission from Kenneth Thiele at Columbia County to share his letter that he shared with me when he had an unpermitted site. And the highlighted sections kind of dial in, identifying what it is that they are in violation of, citing the actual code, county code, and then also took a look at providing that order and that expectation within so many days of the date of this letter, you will get an application into us. They also followed up with additional language that say, it kind of gets to that your right to review. If you believe that we are in error, contact us and we'll discuss the situation. And so this was indeed a non-metallic mine site that was under the guise of a construction site project, and the county basically called them out saying, we believe you're mining here and you need to get an application into us. So that was that notification process that the county went through. And I don't know if we have Ken or anyone else from Columbia County on the call with us. If we do, feel free to unmute and share additional comments about the situation if you are able. And right now, give a minute here. My recollection on this is that they did indeed get their non-metallic mining application in and provided a reclamation plan and financial assurance. Ultimately, the Baptist Church did end up getting their parking lot, and the operator was able to provide that by excavating out a hillside to level it and create that parking surface. And the operator was able to cash in on the material that he removed from the site. Another example is Sauk County. And I know Will wasn't able to make it today. If Brian is on, I will let you kind of jump in and let me know if there's any additional information you'd like to share. But again, here's an example of a site that was operating without permits. And here the county identified not one, not two, but 3 violation sections, and then informed them of the need to get permits and to also document the county's assertion that they are certain that this violation is occurring. And so this did also lead to an operator obtaining permits. Interestingly, this operator had also been operating in another county without permits as well. And so there was some collaboration between Sauk County, myself, and I believe it was Richland County or Vernon County, one of the two, under which this operator was operating without prior knowledge. And so getting them under permit and getting them under permit quickly was key here. Okay, so now that you have an idea of the letter writing, let's talk about considerations for when to use those tools and how to combine them. And so stop work orders can be very effective for non-metallic mine sites that are active and not compliant and needing to get into compliance. A stop work order basically sends the message home to the operator very quickly that we need you to do this and we're not going to allow you to do your mining until you get back into compliance. However, a stop work order might not be effective if you've got an inactive site that's not stabilized, or perhaps maybe they are getting to the point where maybe the operator is no longer in control of the site, like through the loss of a lease or something. So a stop work order might not be appropriate to use. Likewise, suspension revocation might send a very strong message as well, along with a stop work order. But if you could couple that with a penalty or a citation, also known as a forfeiture, but I'm not talking about forfeiting a bond at this point. I'm talking about coupled with a citation, that maybe a brief suspension of permit along with a penalty can send a stronger message to some sites where maybe a stop work order by itself wouldn't be as effective. How you know you're going to be able to apply and which one to apply is going to depend largely on the circumstance that you're working with. Get to know your operator, get to know your circumstance, and know and think, think ahead. If I do this, will it elicit the response I'm looking for? The interesting thing with citations is that you can also consider your costs associated with getting them back into compliance. If you're needing to engage your corporate counsel, if you're needing to work through court costs associated with enforcement, citations can be applied at pretty much any stage of the game. It can be applied with a notice of violation or a notice of noncompliance. It can be issued when you do a suspension or revocation and at the referral level. And written, embedded within that enforcement authority under the state statute and the code is language that says that the degree of that penalty can consider those additional costs to enforce. So you don't have to pass that down to all of your mine operators to compensate for an increase in fees across the board to help cover the expenses associated with enforcement. So that's something to consider as well. I wouldn't necessarily go straight to the maximum citation, but maybe if you're talking about a daily citation, you can also consider applying a citation multiple times to help you deal with the enforcement that you're working through with an operator. For every day they operate the site without a permit, for every day they don't comply with a stop work order. Those are all accumulative. And so if you've got more than one violation, like in the case with Sauk County, you can levy a penalty for every violation that you see at a site, as well as for every day that the site is not in compliance. And that dollar value, you're going to have to talk with your corp counsel on how those get applied. You know, the code and the statute allows you to take those back to your expenses for enforcing on the site. But things might be a little bit different, and I'll explain what happens with DNR as part of a court-appointed forfeiture, so to speak, or a citation. So I know I'm being very kind of vague here, but I'll give you an example with regards to that. To kind of finish off the when to use the tools thing before I kind of jump in and give you my example, we have that referral process is kind of like that highest level, you know, when all your other efforts have failed to get compliance back out on the site, or when there is a degree of imminent danger involved, when there's safety or environmental harm. You know, that referral through the court systems is pretty much reserved for when you have no other choice and you've exhausted all other tools to regain compliance. So with that, I'm going to jump in a little bit and give you my story, and I'm going to check my time here real quick. Okay, we're doing good. And so what my story is a bit on the extreme side, and it did go to a referral process. And we worked very closely with the county on this one. So it involves an industrial sand mine. When I was still an LTE with the department, I had been working with them on compliance measures, and we had already been through kind of the notice of non-compliance. We hadn't issued citations, we hadn't issued a direct enforcement order, but we had noted non-compliance issues. And then in my transition out of an LTE job and into my permanent role as a stormwater management specialist, a very massive storm hit the area. And this was in Trempealeau County in the city of Blair area. And my very first day on the job as a permanent employee, this is what I saw. I called up the operator, asked them how they handled the rain event, and they said, Roberta, there's sand everywhere. I got my PPE and my muck boots, and I headed out to Blair, and we saw some massive mudslides. So this picture kind of in the lower right of the screen is depicting material that left stockpiles at the top of the hillside that were lacking best management practices. It headed toward, it headed through the valley toward a house and entered a stream. Unfortunately, the house in this situation took the brunt of the force of the material that ran through the valley, filled the basement, knocked the house askew from the foundation, and ultimately the house had to be demolished. The well on the site was inundated with sediment and had to be abandoned. And what you see in the upper left corner is kind of the aerial imagery of it. Back in 2012, no one in the department had a drone to be able to do this. And so I hopped a plane with the DNR pilot, and we circled the site. And this was one of several runoffs in that area. So this would be the top of the hill where they had their stockpile material, and material with the house had left the top of the hillside, ran through the valley, and you can see it traveled all the way down the hill, crossed the road, filled the ditch line, crossed the road, went through the farm field, and ultimately made its way into a tributary to the Trempealeau River. And so that occurred several locations around the mine site. And at that point, it didn't matter how cooperative they were trying to be. They didn't have the skill set. They got in way over their heads on it. And the department said, congratulations on your employment. Here's your referral. So that started with a very short but sweet letter to the company indicating to them that these are the violations that we are citing and that we're taking the matter to DOJ. So in your instance, if you had a situation similar to this, you would cite your reclamation violations and you would inform them that you are referring the matter to your district attorney or to your corporate counsel to be processed as a civil suit. And that letter doesn't have to be very lengthy. This is a one-pager, short and sweet, cut to the chase, because the document that gets filed with the court systems, this is what your court counsel, your district attorney is going to be pulling together. In the state of this particular situation, this complaint to DOJ was about 33 pages in length. And so your life becomes focused in on working with your attorneys, the court systems, and documenting the case. And so this case for me chewed up an entire summer's worth of time in addition to my regular workload. But there are circumstances in which that does need to be done because they're way in over their heads. There's imminent danger, environmental impacts, and we weren't getting anywhere with our notice of noncompliance. We skipped a couple of rungs at that point. We worked very closely with Trempealeau County on this site to get them back into compliance again. And rather than issuing citations, because we were running into a situation of what's considered to be double jeopardy. And double jeopardy is a situation where you have overlap between regulatory authorities. So the stormwater program had similar requirements as reclamation does. And so close communication between the state and the county under a referral meant that there was potential that they could be charged by two different authorities for the same thing. And so to avoid double jeopardy, citations were not issued, but rather we sought injunction through the courts. And here's how it all played out. So, and I apologize, I meant to go look for a final resolution picture to show you that they actually did get this site cleaned up, but I ran out of time to put that in. But ultimately, they ended up with an injunction and settled out of court to the tune of a $200,000 fine. And the kind of orders to fix all of their problems and to prevent them from occurring again. So when you look at a violation of that size, some folks might argue that $200,000 isn't very much compared to the damage that was created and the workload and the enforcement expenses associated with it. But ultimately, that forfeiture didn't come back to DNR. It actually went into the general fund for the state and is being utilized to help further the county's efforts, help further the education efforts, and to be utilized in a broader fashion so that that $200,000 penalty didn't come back to the program in any way, shape, or form. Ultimately, the company ended up spending close to $2 million in infrastructure costs and best management practices to get that site back into compliance. And that was the goal for the referral. The goal is to get that compliance back. The forfeitures are there to ensure that not only have they paid their penalty, but that they can also further the environmental resource. And that was the purpose of the forfeiture, not so much to pay for the costs. So, so given that was a very extreme situation. We worked very closely with the county. The county actually utilized their stop work authority to help DNR's efforts at getting them back into compliance. At that time, they were a very busy site, and we wanted them to focus in on their compliance. So worked hand in hand, and it was about a 2-year process before the site was back into compliance again. All right, before we jump into our sharpening skills for situational applications, do we have any questions on the tools, when to pull them out, and kind of, that combination of use of tools?
Yeah, we have a few questions in the chat. Some might be referring to the previous section as well, but where do we find the Wisconsin corporate records? And is there like a link that can be shared?
Yes, Wisconsin Corporate Records is part of the Wisconsin Financial Institute. And so I think if you just do a general search for Wisconsin Corporate Records, you should be able to find it very easily. Later on, I can send the link to that. So when Isabel shares with you the survey, she can share the link with you as well. So just make a note here.
Absolutely. And then the second question is, it appears that if you revoke a permit that turns into a court case, like, is that always the case? So does it always turn into a court case, or is it only if it is contested?
Only if it's contested. And that would have to be, indicative of the situation itself, the degree of compliance and response that you have with your operator, as well as their ability to reclaim the site. If an operator is looking at becoming dissolved or getting out of the business, and they're not complying with their requirements, they might not fight a revocation. But they also might challenge you as well. A lot of what happens out of court. Even that preferred sands referral to DOJ never went to trial. And so even though there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of legal expenses associated with that, the vast majority of these, even with referral and suspension revocation, they don't go through the court systems. I would have to say that that case that I presented with the preferred sand sites in Chempolo County is maybe 1%, if that, of sites that are problematic. And so you do have a lot of latitude, but you do need to be aware that they could go that direction. So.
And there's nothing else that has been added in the chat yet.
Okay. Well, we're winding down. I'm going to now move into talking a little bit about some of those application situations that I presented last month that were not part of the breakout rooms. We talked a little bit about them towards the end of the session. I'm going to expand on them just a little bit. And then when I get through these situations, we'll take some more questions, but then I also want to have an opportunity for folks to share your experiences. And so with that, let's talk about the situation in which we have an operator that failed to submit their annual report. When you contacted them about it, they tell you that they lost their lease and that the landowner won't let them back on the site. So in those situations, maybe the operator would like to mine and hasn't moved to be released from their permit. So that operator still holds that permit and is still responsible for reclamation. However, you may need to sit down and talk with that landowner to get them to understand that by preventing the operator from coming on the site and preventing the operator from doing reclamation, that they may be stepping in the shoes of reclamation. And so that in and of itself may turn that situation around. But if for any reason that you are running into difficulties and you might find yourself needing to issue an order, take a look at the fact that without a lease there, their permit is no longer valid. And so you don't want to run into the situation where the site becomes abandoned. So you might want to look at a failure to reclaim as one of the violations. If, on the other hand, there's a new operator, and we'll talk about that under the next situation, then you might be looking at the new operator as failing to obtain a permit. So failure to reclaim or failure to obtain a permit, or some combination in between. Because there was a delay in informing the county, that could be an indication of cooperation, or maybe just a simply indicator of not sure what to do about this. So you need to set your judgment call on this, and consider, kind of combining an issue to, with an order, combining an order to comply and stop violating. Along with that, this is one where I'm like, yeah, you could start kind of at that lower level, and escalate it as you need to. But this probably is going to be one where there's a lot of miscommunication happening, especially when you're talking about a site in which the operator doesn't own the property. The landowner did allow that operator on their property, and by not allowing them back to do reclamation, that operator is becoming, in a sense, responsible for reclamation. So clearing that up, and getting some cooperation at reclaiming that site and or transferring to a new operator would be the key focuses. And so some folks might not consider that to be enforcement, but it actually is, because you are having that conversation at the lowest level of enforcement needed. You're providing information about compliance, and you're giving them opportunity to make those corrections. So compliance and enforcement kind of go hand in hand, even at that lowest level. So now we have the situation where maybe instead, when you send out that annual report and fee statement, the operator comes back and says, I sold it. Okay, like they were the owner and the operator all in one, and they sold it. Well, you got to find out who ended up buying that site and getting their contact information. Starting out with that communication level. How long has the other operator been mining? You're also going to need to let that operator know, because you didn't inform us, it doesn't matter if you own it or not, you're still responsible for this site because the permit is issued to you at this location. They also have to be responsible for maintaining financial assurance. So you're going to want to check to make sure, do I still have valid financial assurance in place? Believe it or not, operators have been really good at going to their banks and getting their financial assurance canceled without you even noticing. So if that's not in place, now you've got a couple of different violations at hand. Failure to maintain financial assurance is the easy one, but that first operator that still holds the permit, if that new operator went out there and significantly changed the condition of that site, they may be in violation of failing to follow a reclamation plan or failing to modify it. That first operator, by not telling you until you send out your annual report that he doesn't have that site anymore, he runs a huge risk by walking away from that site and not communicating with you right away. That second operator also would be in violation for failing to obtain permit. And they would also be in violation of failure to provide financial assurance. And that can be even in a situation where you do have an operator that says that they have sold a site and that they want to ensure that that new operator is transferred permit. If that new operator doesn't get financial assurance, that old operator is still on the hook. But maybe you want to let that second operator, that new operator, know that they're in violation for failing to provide financial assurance, because that permit transfer isn't valid until you have it in hand. Depending on the degree of the situation, you might want to consider a stop work order. That will send the message home that some administrative work needs to be taken care of, and nobody should be doing anything at that site except for maybe some reclamation activity until it's straightened up. Any questions on these two situations? Nothing yet.
Nothing's in the chat yet.
Okay. Then we will move on to our next situation. Okay. So you have an operator that says they're done mining. Yep, I want to be released. Give me my financial assurance back. I'm all done mining here. So you go out there and you do your certificate of completion inspection, and you find that the site's got all kinds of solid waste. There's a good stand of dead, dried weeds that had kind of grown up in the stockpiles. Can't find any topsoil that's been applied to this site. It's all gravelly and just in rough shape. Maybe they did some grading. Well, you do want to, as part of your certificate of completion, assess whether or not the operator has done any work toward reclamation of the approved plan. So that operator could be facing a violation of failure to follow the plan. So as part of denying a certificate of completion, you may want to follow that up with an order, because the operator has already informed you that they're done mining, their intent to no longer mine, basically. That not only am I not issuing you a certificate of completion, but I'm ordering you to reclaim the site. Okay. You also probably want to consider whether or not you have other violations, such as cease violating the standards, which requires solid waste to be removed. Other standards such as topsoil redistribution, maybe that revegetation plan, okay, failure to follow the plan. We're getting back to that. If it doesn't look like the site can meet the provisions of the reclamation plan, like there's no topsoil there, maybe you want to issue an order to modify the plan so that they can, in effect, meet reclamation standards. So here's a situation where, yep, you want to start out at a low level, but you're going to need to escalate this as needed. The reason why I say that this is going to probably need some escalation is because the operator is already trying to walk away. And they need to get that clear message that not only are you not meeting the standards, but if you really want to walk away from this and be released of your responsibility, you need to get this done correctly. You need to follow the plan and meet the standards. And so this is one where, okay, you can start cautiously, but know that the potential may exist that you would have to escalate it. Likewise, if you get that complaint about material being brought in and buried in the pit, and you get out there and you inspect the site and you talk with the operator and find out this is material that's being brought in from a dugout basement in a nearby residential neighborhood. If you don't necessarily see that the reclamation plan addresses the use of fill material being brought in off site, you're going to need to determine whether or not the reclamation plan is broad enough to consider that fill. I mean, a lot of reclamation plans just say we're going to do 3-to-1 slopes and we're going to revegetate and be done. But maybe, some subsoils are needed in order to get revegetation going. And so they're going to have to bring something in, right? Well, you kind of do need to know something about the material that's being brought in, how much is needed, where it's going to go, and what it's going to be used for. So maybe you want to consider modifying the plan, But you're going to need to do that under 3 circumstances. One, whether or not the post-mining land use is being changed as a result of bringing the fill in, whether or not the criteria for success is changing because of the need to bring in fill material, and whether or not the application of the standards are changing as well. That's where I usually say, okay, if you have, if you tick off any one of those 3 or all 3 of them, you're looking at needing to have a modification of that plan. And so violation due to changing conditions could lead to an order to modify the plan. But at the same time, it might not even be considered a violation. It might not be considered something that you would have to issue an order for. It could be just a situation under which, yep, we know about it. Thank you for sharing your concerns with us. And we went out and inspected the site and did not see a violation. So this one could go either way. Not all complaints lead to a violation. Not all complaints lead to a need to have an order issued for modification. So again, starting out the lowest level possible needed to get compliance, assessing the situation. I think most everybody through the last training session had some really good input on how they would handle situations. And for the most part, most all of these sites are achievable for compliance at that low levels. And so I would say, like, my experience, having been in, permitting programs in the department, 50 to 70% of your sites regain compliance just simply through conversations, doing those site inspections, and pointing out what needs to be done. Another, 20% maybe are those ones that need that notification. Those folks that are just not aware, don't have the skill set, or are trying to get away with something that they know better. Those are the ones that you need to get then that notification process out. Maybe a citation or a combination of notice and citation, depending on the degree of responsiveness you get. Another maybe 5% are ones in which you're going to need to have that more formal notice of violation. Maybe you're going to want to bring them in, sit them down with your core counsel and have that serious conversation and those strict deadlines, and begin to point out to them the potential for that to escalate even further if they don't comply. And then that final 1% is the ones in which you're having to take them to court and potentially settle out of court. And the higher up you go on the escalation level, the more work that's involved. And so getting that compliance at that lowest level of enforcement needed pays off not only for your workload, but helps build those relationships with your operators that you need to in order for them to be able to continue doing their business in compliance with the requirements and being protective of the environment. So there's my spiel. So on that note, first of all, do we have any questions? And then I'd like to give an opportunity for folks to share their experiences.
There is nothing in the chat now, but if anybody wants to add anything to the chat, I can read it out. Otherwise, everybody should be able to unmute themselves if they want to share any experiences directly.
While folks are thinking of an idea to share, I'm going to throw this slide up and you can take a note. There are resources out there that can help you through the enforcement process. I feel very unqualified to provide this type and level of conversation about enforcement, because this is something that you're going to be working with at your county level, at your municipal level, to address. But do know that the Midwest Environmental Enforcement Association is a very good resource. They trained me. They trained many DNR staff. They have skill sets on verbal judo. They help you navigate egregious situations. They also work with local law enforcement as well as our DNR wardens, and they're a very good resource They have a lot of good material and training opportunities as well. All right, folks, we got 10 minutes. Anyone want to share a story?
Hi, Roberta. This is Barry Sullivan, Zaki County.
Hi, Barry.
I have a situation that I just discovered. I haven't acted upon it yet. It actually came about because of an inquiry by the town of Fredonia regarding a building that was put up that they wanted to get permission to do wedding events at, and was dealing about possible whether they might be in violation of our sanitary ordinance. So when I was looking on the aerials, I discovered on part of the property there appears to be a site that they were mining apparently. Not 100% sure, but I went back through the aerials and looked like they started just before 2000, and it has grown since then. And a rough measurement is between 3.5 acres.
Ooh, good size.
Disturbance. So what I'm thinking of doing is just actually sending them a letter informing them that reason this came about was a concern of the town about the proposed wedding event building that they built. But because the town of Fredonia does require any mining activity has to be in a mining district, and the property is not zoned for that at this point. And the town is aware of this. They're waiting for me to act upon on my end first before they act on their end. So am I correct? Now, the one thing I do know that if it's more than an acre, I've been told that if they are using that mining material strictly exclusively for themselves and they're not selling it, they will be exempt, correct?
Right.
Okay, so in other words, if they are selling the material, then they're under reclamation.
Right. So in that instance, similar to what maybe Columbia County did, is that letter that says, we have reason to believe that you may be in violation of ordinance section for failure to obtain permit of a non-metallic mining site. And then giving them the opportunity to discuss with you what the purpose of that mine site was. And then to say, please contact us or submit an application for non-metallic mining by such and such a date, and or discuss with us
Okay.
what your situation is.
That's
So
what I was kind of thinking about doing now, because I don't want to say that you are. I just want to kind of get in touch with them, and hopefully they'll respond back to me so we can discuss exactly what they're doing out there and that, you know, because eventually I probably have to go do a site visit, but I'd rather get them to contact me first before I did all that. So.
Yep. So you can start with an informal conversation to learn more. And then if you have enough information that leads you to believe that they are in fact mining, then following up with the letter just to get it documented. And that's where we DNR distinguishes the difference between a notice of non-compliance versus a notice of violation. That notice of compliance is just that kind of documented letter that says we have reason to believe that you're non-compliant with our regulations.
And
it gets a documentation in case it escalates.
Right. So if they come back saying, well, okay, we're going to cease all mining activity, they're still on the hook to reclaim it, correct?
Yes.
If they decide to stop.
Yes. If they don't meet an exemption, and that they have been mining and they didn't get their zoning authority, and it's not likely that they're going to get their zoning authority, then maybe an order to reclaim would be something you would want to consider.
Okay. All right. I'll probably continue further on this, but that gives me what I need to do.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to share an experience or ask a question?
Yeah, so we've got two things in the chat right now. One is, can you explain what verbal judo is?
Sure. So verbal judo is the conversation that you need to have with the operator that shows that you are the one in authority. It's easy to get walked over if you simply ask nicely for them to do something. Okay, verbal judo is hey, I'm understanding I'm being respectful, but I'm also establishing my degree of authority here in this situation, and directs the person to not only openly give them the opportunity to share information, but also to respect your position. So verbal judo is kind of that, what to say, how to say, and yet still be respectful, but not to be off-putting. It's something that has to be learned. I can't explain it, but it helps you learn how to take the emotion behind the violation out and to get specifically to what you need in a fashion that helps them want to comply. And so we call that verbal judo.
Okay, and then we have another thing in the chat that is someone from Douglas County that says we have a local project where a railroad river crossing will be removed and the embankment and culvert will be removed. There will be a large amount of material removed from the site. Does this require a permit or reclamation plan?
Great question. Take a look at some of the exemptions that are in your ordinance and or NR 135. There is an exemption for road right-of-way projects to excavate, and that includes rail lines and anything associated with a transportation corridor. And so things like road cuts or bed cuts in which material needs to be taken out is something that is allowable under that exemption. The catch is that it has to be part of that project. It has to be such that that project is providing some type of oversight with stabilization, is of a limited duration and intent. It's not uncommon for operators to say, this is really good material that we have to take out of here. And I've got somebody that can use it. I can sell it or basically charge a fee for transporting material. That is recognized as part of larger projects and does not necessarily exhibit a kick out of that exemption. So do take into consideration, maybe have the conversation with the rail line folks or with the folks that are permitting that. DNR staff might be involved if it's more than an acre. And so consider whether or not an exemption exists. If not, like it's a borrow site area that's not covered under a DOT project or being overseen through a short duration permit like a construction site permit, you do have the opportunity to require them to get a reclamation permit. But yeah, check your exemptions first.
Okay, and then we have another in the chat. So going back to your story about the Trempealeau County situation that really blew up your workload, do you have any enforcement action recommendations for how a county balances those workload escalations or breakdowns in staffing, such as like if staff are on leave during the timeline or trying to get an operator back in compliance? This is more of a workflow problem than a regulatory one.
Right, exactly. Boy, I feel the pain on that. Believe it or not, that one referral that I had that took much of my workload was not my only referral that year. And I had many other responsibilities to have to do. And so, yeah, you're going to have to do some workload prioritization. If something can be put on hold, if somebody can pick up other workload while you focus in on that. Those are the conversations that you need to have on a broader level with county officials, maybe other departments within your county level, to see if they can help assist you with that workload level. If somebody is on leave, getting creative. Is this is this a larger issue that is involving the DNR as well? In which case, can other enforcement actions and compliance needs be temporarily put on hold while other enforcement actions are ongoing? And so they can be coordinated with other agencies and or within the county itself, but is largely the biggest challenge that exists when you have these high level of enforcement actions.
And there's nothing else currently in the chat.
And it looks like we are at 10:30. So with regards to any other questions that are coming up, you can get a hold of me anytime. I will not promise I'll answer the phone right away, but I will get back to you within a short time frame, and happy to assist you with any of your enforcement challenges.